On behalf of University of Chicago, we are deeply grateful to Honorable Minister Shri K.J. George and Shri Mahendra Jain ji for entering into this partnership and for their time as we launch this first-of-the-kind competition that will help address Bangalore's energy and environmental issues. Next, we will have a panel discussion on the environmental challenges and opportunity Bengaluru faces and the need for evidence-based policy solutions. We have a very distinguished panel from government, academia, and civil society. I would like to first invite Dr. Ken Lee, the Executive Director of the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago's India team, to the stage to moderate this panel. Ken is the Executive Director of EPIC India and also a Senior Research Associate at the Department of Economics, University of Chicago. Prior to this, Ken was a postdoctoral research fellow at the Energy Institute at HASS and the Center for Effective Global Action based at the University of California, Berkeley. He holds a PhD in Agricultural and Resource Economics from UC Berkeley. Ken works on topics related to development economics and energy economics. His previous work includes a collaboration with Kenya's Rural Electrification Authority to design and evaluate the economics of last mile electrification in a randomized experiment. Thanks, Ken. I would like to invite our first panelist, Shri Mahendra Jain ji, to please join us on stage. Shri Mahendra Jain is the Additional Chief Secretary of the Urban Development Department and the key support for us and for making this innovation challenge possible. We are so happy to have you here with us today. Now I would like to invite Mr. Sanjay Sridhar to join us on the panel. Sanjay is the C40 Regional Director for South and West Asia. He is responsible for facilitating cities in the region to participate in the exchange of best practices to reduce the sources of greenhouse gas emissions and their impact on climate change. Sanjay has more than 20 years of work experience in the areas of architecture, urban development and planning, heritage and conservation studies, sustainable design, and governance and public policy. Prior to joining C40, Sanjay was with World Resources Institute as the Director for Urban Development for India, and he also helped establish WRI's regional office in Bangalore. He was also a member of the Agenda for Bengaluru Infrastructure and Development Task Force, which undertook a comprehensive study of all aspects of urban development for the city of Bangalore. Thanks, Sanjay, for joining us. Now I would like to invite our third panelist, Dr. Veena Srinivasan. Veena is a fellow at the Center for Development and Environment at Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment. At ETRI, she leads several interdisciplinary research projects that combine field hydrology, low-cost sensing, citizen science, and simulation modeling to understand and find solutions to critical water problems. Prior to joining ETRI, Veena worked for several years in the private and not-for-profit sectors in energy, water, and forest policy issues in India. She received her PhD from Stanford University, where her research framework integrated both centralized and decentralized approaches to urban water supply in India. Thanks, Veena, and thanks to all the panelists.
Great. Well, thank you, Anna, for the introduction, and thank you to all the panelists for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedules to be here, and it's a pleasure to meet you, so thank you. As Anna mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of EPIC India. We are an economics think tank. We're based in Delhi, and we care very deeply about energy and environmental policy and economic development. Our model is to work hand in hand with government and industry partners to identify and evaluate innovative solutions and policies that can expand access to energy while minimizing the environmental impacts. And as a group of applied economists and engineers, we place heavy emphasis on rigorous evaluation. So evaluations of ideas that can tell us what works and what doesn't work. As Anna described, the goal of the Bengaluru Innovation Challenge is to invite citizens and organizations and groups to get involved and to think of the best ideas possible, to present and share those ideas with us that can address the energy and environmental challenges facing the city. We will then work to identify the most exciting ideas and then work with you to evaluate those ideas, figure out if they could be scaled up, and if they can, do our best to make sure that they scale up in a way to maximize impact. So it's a very exciting competition and challenge, and we're looking forward to the ideas that come in. In this panel, I'd like to discuss 3 topics related to the Bengaluru Innovation Challenge. At the end, we'll save some time to take some questions, but if you have any questions that pertain to the discussion at hand, please raise your hand and we'll try to get more of the crowd involved. So the topics we're going to discuss are the challenges in energy and environment that the city faces today, the model of crowdsourcing ideas, and the role of evidence in policymaking. So the first topic is the energy and environmental challenges in Bangalore, and I'll start with Mr. Jain. Thank you again for making the time. In your view, what are the principal energy and environmental challenges in Bangalore, and what is the government doing to confront them?
Yeah, I mean, you heard the minister, he spoke at length about various challenges that we have. In terms of air pollution, if you compare Bangalore with other cities, we don't do as badly as, say, Delhi or Chennai or this thing. But we have an issue, I mean, and most of the air pollution in Bengaluru comes from the number of vehicles that we have. We have more than 7 million vehicles, and every day a few thousand are getting registered. And like it was pointed out, a lot of them are two-wheelers, so the emissions from the vehicles is becoming a big issue. So to encourage use of public transport, I mean, our strategy has been basically threefold, that we improve the public transport, we encourage people to use non-motorized transport, and we move towards an electric vehicle policy. I mean, Karnataka was the first state to implement an electric vehicle policy to incentivize research and development, manufacturing, and people using electrical vehicles to have the charging infrastructure and so on, which now forms part of all our policy initiatives. So on public transport, a lot of work has been done to improve the public transport, not just metro, but even the BMTC, the bus transport, or other modes of public transport. And we're giving a lot of emphasis on non-motorized transport, so improving the pavements. For instance, in phase 1, we have a metro line network of about 43 kilometers, about 40 stations are there. So each station within 1 kilometer, at least 1 kilometer vicinity, the footpaths will be absolutely spick and span. Even if the road condition is not good, but the footpaths will be good. You must have seen some of the pavements that we have in Bangalore on the tender sure roads, where footpaths have been built to world standards. So we are giving more and more emphasis on this. So we are providing a lot of allocation. We are allocating resources for improving the pavements. In this year's budget itself, 200 crores has been provided. In next year's budget, we have proposed for another 500 crores just for improvement of footpaths so that people can walk around. Bangalore climate is good, fortunately, almost all through the year. We have an ambient atmosphere, ambient climate, so people can walk up to 1 or 2 kilometers very easily. Skywalks, building a lot of skywalks so that people don't have to cross roads and expose themselves to hazards. So that public transport and the non-motorized transport, bicycle lanes. We now have a public bicycle sharing program. Mysore was the first city where we have a PBS initiative. Now in Bangalore also, we have already approved, and very soon you will see a lot of bicycles on the road where people can hire bicycles, people can use bicycles. So a lot of initiatives have been taken to take care of the energy and the air pollution related issues. On water, I'll talk later.
That's fantastic, and it's great to hear about so many ideas and initiatives coming from the government with regards to air pollution. To follow up on this question, I want to direct a question at you, Sanjay. So Mr. Jain has mentioned several things that the city has done, like building skywalks and implementing this electrical vehicle policy. So these are things that the city is doing. What types of ideas do you see coming from citizens, just regular folks who might be interested in applying for this competition, based on what you've seen happening in other cities?
And I don't know if the mic's working. Thank you. I mean, looking at it from a C40 perspective, because we are a global platform for the world's biggest cities, and Bangalore is one of the key members from India. I think what we really see is the attitude in civil society in Bangalore, which puts us apart from other cities in India, which is the involvement of people in both. I think historically civil society has always criticized the government, but I think in Bangalore we are seeing that civil society is playing both roles. You criticize and give solutions, and the willingness within government to take those solutions. And as Minister George Saab said, that eventually the government has to make a call. They have to take a decision what's in the best interest of the city based on the elected representatives and the role they play. But given the fact that there is enough body of knowledge outside of government that can be used inside of government, there are processes and protocols that the government has to follow in terms of how public money is spent, because it's taxpayers' money. But the idea of innovation doesn't always define or doesn't always remain within the boundaries of government. So I think there is a difference between governance and government, which is how decisions are made and who makes the decision. And I think this is really what puts Bangalore apart from other cities. And as Jain Saab said, that talking about air quality, I mean, we are seeing this. Bangalore has taken the lead. I think it was beginning of December when the mayor of Bangalore, along with the mayor of London, they launched the global network of cities on air quality. And this is a C40 initiative where we have elected members. And mind you, air quality doesn't necessarily come under BVMP, because it is a cross-connecting issue where you have multiple sources that impact air quality. Some of it lie within BBMP, some of it are in the pollution control board, some of it in the transport department, so this is at multiple levels of government. So, but for a city of Bangalore to stand up and say we are going to take this issue head on, because we do not want to be the next Delhi, right? The fact that we are at 85 roughly in terms of air quality index, anything above 50 is harmful, right? If we do not do anything today, based on what George Saab said, that we are the fastest growing city, if we do not do anything today, we will be the next Delhi very quickly, and faster than Delhi, we will be there. So we have to take remedial measures now, and that's the heart of innovation, because you have to scale and measure impact. And that which goes to your next question on kind of metrics-based decision making that is driven by numbers and data, and the data has to be verifiable, the data has to be credible and legitimate as well. Okay. Eventually, when you put this data out. So let me stop there.
Okay, thank you. So at the beginning of your response, you spoke a little bit about the attitude of civil society and their willingness to engage with the government. And before we expand a little bit on that topic, I wanted to direct a question to Veena. So you're an expert in urban water supply. At Atri, you lead the program on water, land, and society. And so I want to talk about water a little bit. How would you characterize the challenge that Bangalore faces when it comes to effectively managing its water resources?
So, I mean, I think the very first thing to note, and the minister kind of referred to it earlier, is that Bangalore, and you, Sanjay said it as well, is that Bangalore is growing so fast that I would challenge any city anywhere in the world to be able to do any kind of catching up with infrastructure and staying ahead of the game with this kind of growth. And so any criticism that we are directing has to be taken in that context, that really it's an impossible task to start with, that we're just growing at an unprecedented rate. So that being said, clearly it poses immediate challenges of how do you get water fast enough or lay the pipes fast enough and get water sources fast enough in a basin that's already closed to the population that's growing at the rate it is. There's also a problem of efficiency and how badly people are using it, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then there's a problem of wastewater, because 80% of the water that we get returns back as wastewater into the environment, and we're not treating it fast enough. And the issue is not just, it's twofold on the wastewater side. Not only are we not building sewage treatment plants fast enough, but even the existing sewage treatment plants are not running at full capacity because we can't lay sewers fast enough to be able to direct the wastewater into them. And so you have this ironic situation where you don't have enough wastewater capacity, but even your sewage treatment plants are at 50% capacity because they're not sewered, or rather the sewage hasn't been directed to the sewage treatment plants at the rate the city is growing. So we have all three of those big picture challenges that we need to address. Now, I think on the water side, clearly our biggest problem is that we have a single source dependence. We used to get our water from the TG Halli catchment. For various reasons, which I won't get into, that's dwindled to almost zero at the moment. And so now we are entirely dependent on the Kaveri, and that's an interstate river. We've hit our limit that the Supreme Court allows us to take, theoretically hit our limit. And so then there's a problem of where are we going to get water when for this next phase of growth. Now, I think the big problem here is that the way our utilities, and not just Indian utilities, but utilities most parts of the world, are kind of conditioned to think about water and wastewater in a particular way, which I would say 18th century thinking in water and wastewater, which is that you bring water from faraway pristine sources and you take the water as far away from the city as possible. And this was a very sensible thing to do when there were serious economies of scale issues in wastewater treatment, but also we didn't have antibiotics and we didn't know how to treat wastewater cheaply. And so that's how cities in Europe developed in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, which is you take the wastewater as far away as possible and bring water from further and further away. Now for Bangalore, that means that if we aren't running out of the Kaveri, we've got to get water from across the Western Ghats, either Netravati or Sharavati or one of those rivers, and any of those projects are going to be expensive, contested, and probably never built, given the kind of political situation we have, where the claimants on the other side really don't want their water to be taken away to Bangalore. So if that's the constraint, or that's the big picture problem that we face, the alternative solution, which a lot of cities now, including Cape Town, Australia, all of these things, cities are now beginning to think of, is integrated urban water management, which is really how do you use your water sources and use your wastewater, stormwater, groundwater in a sensible way locally, instead of only thinking about getting your water from further and further away and taking your wastewater further and further away. And I think that naturally lends itself to the kind of innovation challenge you've set up, because we are really talking about then decentralized local management, which means that it feeds very well into what kinds of technologies do you need, what kinds of institutions do you need, what kind of data do you need in order to be able to make that possible. So I'll end there for the moment, and then
That's a fascinating characterization of the problem. I think in the third section we can go into what you see are some of the, what could be some innovative ideas when it comes to decentralized management of wastewater and that sort of thing. So that's really helpful. Moving on to the second topic, which is crowdsourcing local ideas, which is a big part of this competition. I want to turn the microphone back to Mr. Jain. Could you tell us what has led the government to support this type of crowdsourcing model?
I mean, we firmly believe that the answer to the problems, the solution to the problems that we have is very much with us. We don't have to look for any solutions outside. I'm reminded of a short story which I'd like to share with you. An old woman is looking for something outside the road under the street light. And a passerby, he's going by and he says, "Can I help you? What are you looking for?" And she says that, "I dropped my needle somewhere. I'm looking for the needle." And he asks her, do you remember where you used it last and where did you drop it? And she says that, "I was working in the kitchen. I was working with the needle and it fell." So he asks her, why are you looking for it out here? It fell there. So she said, "Because there's more light here. There's a street light here." So if we're looking for solutions outside somewhere because there's more knowledge, that's not the way to go. We have in Bangalore very, very committed knowledgeable, intelligent people who have worked in different parts of the world, who have seen the world, and they have a lot of ideas. So I mean, whenever any initiative is taken, people are bursting with ideas. And a lot of them are very, very useful ideas, very good ideas. So we feel that crowdsourcing is the way to go. People have a lot of ideas, and this is an opportunity where people can actually try out their ideas with this initiative. So when the University of Chicago initiative, and they got in touch with us, I was very, very forthcoming. It was just about a month back or 2 months back that we first had this interaction, and very quickly we got the MOU approved by the government at the level of the minister, and within 2 months we are sitting here to launch this initiative. So I think crowdsourcing is the way to go. Government is fully committed to implement it, and we really look forward to ideas for the problems that we have, whether it's environment or energy or congestion or solid waste, or the city is grappling with a lot of challenges, and we are really hopeful that we'll get great ideas which we can try out in small ways and then scale up to solve the problem of our city. Thank you.
Great, great. Thank you, thank you. Great. Sanjay, my next question is for you. So you're the regional director at C40. For those of you who don't know, C40 is focused on tackling climate change and driving urban action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and climate risks while increasing the health, well-being, and economic opportunities of urban people. So my question is, with C40, have you seen examples of other cities using a crowdsourcing model to generate ideas? And if not, is that a promising way forward?
So I think the answer to your question is yes. There are cities in the global network, and we are 93 of the biggest cities of the world on the C40 platform. And what we're seeing, a couple of things, and I think we've, from where I'm looking at the entire region. So I manage the region from Israel to Bangladesh, so all of Middle East, all of South Asia. So I got some really big cities. The Delhi, the Mumbais, the Karachis, the Dhakas, you have Dubai, Amman in Jordan. These are cities that are big. They also have an exploding population in these cities. And as a result of which, and my fellow panelist is right, because what she said is true, because no city has grown at the pace that we have in Bangalore, from 3.5 million in 1985 to what, we're 10.8, 11 million. 12 million now. So we've grown 300% in 30 years. So that's a decade.
If you see, we were 200 square kilometers, today we are 800 square kilometers.
So it's not just in area, but also in terms of the scale of challenges. So transport is a problem in every city, but the minute the city crosses a certain threshold, the same problem on transport of water is exponentially harder to solve. And this is where the crowdsourcing of innovation and ideas comes in. And what we're seeing, and going back to your point, Ken, is the fact that we've seen more cities in the global south. We have an annual C40 Awards, which is hosted by Bloomberg Philanthropy. Michael Bloomberg, who was a former mayor of New York City, he brings the biggest cities of the world to compete for innovation and ideas. I think it was last year, the city of Kolkata won the award on waste. It was unheard of for Calcutta to anything coming out of Calcutta, but there is tremendous amount of work happening there, because they have looked at an integrated waste management kind of solution that borrowed from across the border. They went to Dhaka, and Dhaka has a history, 50 years of history on dealing with composting of organic waste. And there is no shame in going and saying, we got to learn from Dhaka, we got to learn from Delhi on something, so within waste, you can look at 5 cities and look at crowdsourcing innovation. So within a sector alone, it's not that you only have to go from a particular city, which is where a platform like C40 helps, because you are not tied to a particular city in terms of a sister city partnership. You are taking the best of innovation. Ideas that have tested and sometimes failed are more useful than ideas that have only tested and been successful. Because you have far more lessons to learn in ideas that have failed, because you can avoid those pitfalls. in cities where you're trying. I'll just take one more minute to explain, I think, where some cities, so for example, BMTC, they run probably one of the biggest fleet in the country, roughly 7,000 buses, but all of them are diesel. And I think there is vision and leadership both within BMTC and Government of Karnataka to replace these buses with electric buses. I think the electric vehicle policy is a step in that right direction. It needs to be more robust, which is work in progress, and I think that's fine. But I think the idea and the vision that BMTC is looking at 12,000 electric buses, or maybe closer to 12,000 buses in the next 10 years, because they are already thinking of that scale of number. So what we are doing in terms of C40, in terms of supporting both the government, in terms of the transport department, but also BMTC, is laying out an infrastructure roadmap and a finance roadmap, because it's not about the bus or the battery technology. You also have to have the finance pipeline in place. So we are helping them. So in terms of crowdsourcing innovation, it's also innovation in finance mechanisms. It's innovation in governance, because it's not about taking a diesel engine and replacing it with an electric engine. It's not that. Institutionally as well, BMTC has to restructure itself. It's about vehicle diagnostics coming in. It's the discharge rate of the batteries with the stop and go traffic that we have in Bangalore. I am from Bangalore. My family has been in Bangalore since early 1900s. I remember Bangalore walking from Basangudi to Malleshwaram. I cannot walk anymore. However, I can say that there is enough innovation and enough thinking within the city to acknowledge, yes, we have a problem, because half the problem is in acknowledging, the other half is the solution. And I think this really is the key for us to bring in the sense of innovation in public problem solving, because this is where cities really have to leapfrog and look at the environmental impact as they start to make decisions on projects.
Great, thank you. I thought it was interesting that you said that we could learn a lot from ideas that have been tested and failed, because that really speaks to the value of holding these types of evaluations to see what works and what doesn't work. I want to talk about water again. I thought it was really interesting how you described this sort of classic model of urban water management, which sounded a lot like a natural monopoly. It's the government needs to do this because it's expensive, and so the government will bring in water and they'll get rid of wastewater. And when you describe the system like that, it's not immediately clear how local citizens could get involved or even contribute ideas to this type of system. This is a system that is run entirely by the government. But then you said that we are moving more towards a state where there's a role for decentralized solutions to water collection and waste management. So I wanted to talk about that since we're on the topic of crowdsourcing, which is by nature decentralized. So what are some of the ideas that you've heard about with regards to decentralized water management? That sounded really cool. And what are some of the key considerations that people should keep in mind when thinking about decentralization?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking the question and framing it in that way, because I think, firstly, there's a couple of things to remember, which is that what you're really dealing with is public goods. And a lot of the innovation in cities like Bangalore happens around private goods, because clearly there's a private revenue stream coming in to that. And one of the reasons we don't have enough innovation around public goods is just because it's done, traditionally been the purview of the government. And therefore, it's not clear how revenues or anybody can run a revenue model or a company in that space. That being said, I also want to clarify that I didn't mean to imply that the government has no space in water and sanitation. Clearly, the government will remain a major provider of water and sanitation. However, the city is growing so fast that large parts of the peri-urban Bangalore do not have sanitation at the moment. So right now, in fact, all of the growth that's happening is in the peri-urban, because so much of the land in the middle of the city is actually public land, that all of the new development and the population is all in the peri-urban area, and a lot of it is unsewered. And a lot of it does not get any water supply. So in a sense, it's not just a future that I'm talking about or even a desirable future, but it's the reality of today that a significant part of New Bangalore does not receive Kaveri water supply and does not have wastewater. So in that context, what is happening? What you have right now is either apartments are putting their untreated sewage into open drains, and then it goes to Bengaluru, and we all know the problems that arise with lots of stinky sewage going into a big water body. Or the apartments are putting it into soak pits, and that goes into the ground and has its own issues with groundwater, contamination of groundwater, and we have excessive nitrates in some places. So in both of the solutions, in the absence of the government, are problematic, whether you put it into an open drain or a soak pit. Now, if you think about why we think about wastewater at all in this way, why do we think about wastewater as being something which is a public bad that we need to get rid of? Well, that came from the 17th, 18th century when the only kind of wastewater treatment that was conceivable was a large centralized sewage treatment plant, and you needed to send water in a big pipe to that centralized wastewater treatment plant. But if you look at the economics, over the last 100 years or 30, 40 years, the economies of scale argument has gradually changed, and it is feasible to do wastewater treatment at much lower scales. Now, you talked about one really interesting idea that I might want to say could be transformative, and I would argue that if I had to redesign a city today from scratch without having any legacy to worry about, because right now we can't. We have a legacy system and we build on that legacy system. But let's say it was completely greenfield. And Amravati is a greenfield city that's literally coming up from scratch, right? So we have opportunities in India to completely rethink a city without worrying about the legacy of 200 years of where did the technology start. Would we still design our water and wastewater systems in exactly the same way that we've always designed them? And I would argue that there are spaces, and the technology is not completely there yet, but I imagine in the next 20 years, I would argue that there are spaces to redesign the way we have toilets. So I would say, right now we think about compostable toilets or eco-sand, but that's really a low-cost solution that we think that we need to do in villages. But why couldn't you have fancy toilets that any one of us would be happy to have in our homes, designed by whatever fancy company, Parryware or whatever else, which were composting toilets, where instead of taking all of that water, bringing it over the Western Ghats, flushing it in my toilet, then either sending it to an apartment or neighborhood or centralized treatment plant, semi-treating it, and then putting the half-treated water into the Rishbhavati River, so it's further causing any bad. Why wouldn't we completely have source segregation at the toilets, where you have composting toilets, convert waste to energy right at the apartment scale or the household scale, and not have all of that water that really, all of your flushing water, which is a good 30% of your water, is literally to move the poop across the city. So I think that there are it's not that our technology has reached there yet, but I think there are really transformative solutions around sanitation that could completely change both our water and wastewater.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something to what she said. I mean, she contextualized the problem of Bangalore very articulately by saying how quickly it has grown. There's another topographical issue about Bangalore. Most other cities are either on the banks of a large river or by the seaside. Bangalore, unlike those cities, the water that we are drawing from is almost 120 kilometers away, Kaveri. We don't have any big river or ocean in which the wastewater just flows and vanishes, which is also an opportunity because we have small streams with interconnecting lakes, and perhaps when the population was manageable, the water was getting purified through bioremediation, sitting in those lake bodies, with all the natural vegetation and so on, getting itself improved, and it would flow. But the rate at which we have grown now, the quantity of water that we are consuming, the quantity of water, the wastewater that we are releasing has reached way beyond the capacity of these lakes to handle this. And therefore, that is why we have a problem, which is why all these solutions, I mean, the large STPs are not the solution. I agree with her very completely that we need smaller facilities, whether it's a small decentralized sewage treatment plant or whether it is through the wetlands or through bioremediation. There are various ways of doing it, but where we stand today with 12 million people, perhaps we have to, and since our topography is such that the wastewater doesn't go away into an ocean or a river, and I'm not saying that it should be done, that's how it should be done. We need to take care of the wastewater that we are generating, and therefore a lot of measures are being taken, not only through the STPs, but also through rainwater harvesting, through reducing the leakages through our unaccounted for water, where we have brought down the wastage from almost 50+% to 40%, a 10% reduction in wastage by identifying the leakages, by plugging them, by taking care of them, and those efforts are continuing. So we can manage our existing resources much better just by by more efficient way of handling them.
Thank you for such thoughtful comments. Just thought it was very interesting when you're describing these sort of, how would you rethink the design of a city in terms of wastewater. I think many folks on the energy side think about it in the same way, decentralized energy production and generation. And so it's kind of neat to think of the parallels there. And to what you're saying, it's interesting to think that the geographic characteristics of Bangalore, the fact that it's not on a coastline, could actually lead to some new thinking about how to handle waste. So that's great. I want to move to the third topic, which is evidence-based policymaking. And then we'll take some questions from the crowd. But I'm going to ask you again, Mr. Jain, to kick this off. Is evidence-based policymaking something that the government has consciously decided to use to sort of identify, what types of actions to take?
Yes, definitely. I mean, any policy that's decided, it's based on some evidence, but that evidence is not robust enough. All right? I mean, we see from published research, we see from various expert opinions or from consultants, from their analysis, we see what is the problem, and then we look for solutions. And in this initiative, what you've started, I see that there'll be a lot of ideas which will be resource-driven solutions, where you find the money to do these programs and you'll take care of the problems. We're also looking at initiatives which will be technology-driven. I mean, that now with the technology available of artificial intelligence and robotics and drone technology, and there's so many now new options available that a lot of and Bangalore is the technology capital of India, so we expect that a lot of technology-driven initiatives to come. And even more important, the idea-driven initiatives. When the problem becomes very intense, then you are desperate and you look for a solution. So some creative solution, creative management of our existing issues, that can lead to, but these ideas have to be proven. I mean, people will have a lot of ideas, so unless they're proven, there is evidence to prove that those ideas work. Just because an idea looks very attractive, it cannot be, if we implement that, I mean, there might be unforeseen implications. So we need to test them out, see that they work, and then scale it up. I think that's the way to go. So it will be a definite improvement upon the way policies are now designed or initiatives are now taken. This evidence-based and pilot project-based approach, I think is going to work.
Great, thank you. Sanjay, thinking about evidence-based policymaking, if you could improve the way that evidence is produced and then communicated to policymakers, what would those improvements be?
Yeah, I think, as Mr. Jain said, I think the key to good policy is also, it has to be based on robust data that is verifiable, is measurable, and scalable. And I'll give you one such example before I answer your question. I think it was July of 2017 when the Commissioner of BBMP, along with the Chief Engineer of the Tender Shore project, went to Copenhagen to attend a walkability workshop that we hosted, and where data collection, how do you measure the impact of Tender Shore? It is not just by the number of people who walk, but it's the impact on air quality. If more people walk on the tender shore streets, there is a change from, there is a shift from motorized to non-motorized, which is the NMT piece. But there's also a way to measure the public health impact of as a result of it. And so the eventual success of the tender shore is if you start putting air quality sensors on the tender shore streets and you start measuring the impact of that, you will directly see a correlation in terms of when there is a spike in the number of people walking, there is a spike in a downward spike in terms of the air quality improving on those streets because more people take public transport. Absolutely, because they walk more. There's more cardio exercise when you walk. So one thing, I think this is where Bangalore continues to take the lead in cities in India, because probably maybe after the elections, we will help the city of Bangalore and GOK build an emissions inventory for the city, because you have to be able to say which is the biggest polluter in the city. Chennai is building it, by the way. So, and their percentage, I think transport is the highest polluter in the city of Chennai, both in terms of air quality, but also environmental impact. So once you have a citywide inventory, you clearly then identify, you do a governance mapping and you say which department is responsible for the transport emissions, who is responsible for water and the energy consumption, who's responsible for waste. And there are clearly agencies that we can work with to help to say, okay, this is what we have to do. But more importantly, I think the key to kind of data-based policy making, it has to be data-driven but technology-enabled. Because really, that is when you can scale. And this is what we are seeing across the C40 network, is cities that are investing in data that can be replicable and scalable. And then eventually, what do you do with the data? You put the data out for public discourse. The BPACs of the world, they do exactly this kind of role, is to be able to say, when you take data on segregation, Bangalore is one of the few cities where we've struggled to move from unsegregated to segregated waste, but we have made a headway. I think we had 50% segregation at source now. 50% segregation. No city in India has 50% segregation at source. I'm not saying 50% is a good number. It is still low, but we are at least on the roadmap towards source segregation. Because if you do not segregate, you will have a perennial problem of managing waste, and the city is only going to grow. So to put it in a pessimistic, things are only going to get worse if you don't segregate. So you start segregating now. If you want to do composting, start doing composting now at home, because that's when you improve the capacity of BBMP, because you cannot expect BBMP to keep collecting your waste. It's simply not, it is not going to happen. And this is where innovation in terms of resident welfare associations, non-profits, civil society organizations coming to help the government is really at the core of innovation in terms of dealing with urban challenges.
Great, thank you. Okay, I've lost track of time a little bit, and I definitely wanted to see if anyone had questions in the audience. So if you do, please. We have a mic? Okay, great. Thank you.
Great discussion. I was curious to the last point, data-driven policy making. So data is critical. I was just curious, so the way data is going to be generated is going to be common across cities. So just throwing it out there, should the central government take a lead and kind of formulate like a process on how data is going to be accumulated and generated, and then the state governments replicate that across the cities?
Whoever, whether it's the central government or the state government, that's not important, but the idea is important, that you need to get data from people. And now with the technology that we have at hand, it's possible to get that data very quickly. So you're saying whether it's the central government which should take the lead and state government should replicate?
I'm just saying each city should not start from scratch and create that technology infrastructure to generate that data.
I mean, there's some point in what you're saying that I mean, if we have standardization and if there are templates, then other cities have only to follow. But I think we are still at a very nascent stage in this data or evidence-based solutions and so on. So I think I would rather encourage that each city experiments at this point of time. They find their way through the problems, and through that, some solutions will crystallize over a period of time. There will be some failures, there will be some successes. They will learn how to encounter those, confront those problems, and over a period of time, we will have solutions. So rather than having a template, a standard solution, I'd rather that cities experiment, at least at this stage, and then we move towards that.
All the data should be open. Yeah, so that players apart from the government can do all their analysis, which can contradict the government, but the government is investing taxpayer money in generating that data, so that data should be open.
But let me also say this. In terms of data, I think it's absolutely critical that, and Jensab, you're right, I think cities in India are still in their infancy in terms of data. But however, too much data is also a problem. Right? So I think there needs to be a balance on going and collecting the right kind of data, the right quality of data. There's both quantity and quality. But more importantly, I think there are enough templates available, as Jensab said, that there are other cities. I mean, for example, South African cities, they are more closer to the Indian cities than Europe or the US, because we are a federal structure. To answer your question, when it comes to urban development in cities, national government can actually play a very little role. It is the state and the city that has the absolute mandate to say how we want to develop our cities. So in terms of who collects data, I mean, if you look at why national missions have always never succeeded completely, they have some success. Why the JNNURMs or the Smart City Mission or the Hriday or the Swachh Bharat, they have challenges in terms of implementation because we are so diverse as a country, even within the state. If Mysore is the cleanest city, why isn't Bangalore? Because there are fundamental diversities of how the two cities are. It's an attitude in the people of city of Mysore. They take pride. I'm not saying we don't take pride in Bangalore, but I'm saying that you have to take that into context, even in kind of data collection and decision making based on the data.
Great. Thank you. Let's take one more question.
Hello, my name is Sarit Shashidharan. I'm from Ernst & Young. So during the discussion, there was this mention of peri-urban areas which largely lack sewerage network. So is there any plan around this, that how do we connect our peri-urban areas through some mechanism? For example, Devanahalli, which has demonstrated FSSM, and recently there was an announcement as well by the government that it's going to scale up FSSM. So this question is not just for peri-urban of Bangalore, but across the state.
See, on sewage treatment and so on, the example of Devanahalli, I think that's something which can be an example to a lot of people. Small townships or self-sufficient areas, if they harvest the water, the rainwater, they use maximum quantity of that water, and if they treat their own water and use the wastewater, the treated water also, that's an ideal situation that reduces the load on the city. But as far as for all the peri-urban areas of Bangalore are concerned, now you're aware that in 2007 we were a 200 square kilometer city. Then 110 villages, 7 CMCs, 1 TMC, more than 600 square kilometer area got added. Now, all those new villages and cities which have got added to Bangalore, it becomes the responsibility of the Bangalore Water Supply Board to provide them with water, same quality of water, to provide them with underground drainages, to provide sewage treatment plants. So for a problem of this magnitude, although these small success stories here and there are going to help immensely, and I'm sure they'll have a snowballing effect and more people will take to that. Only recently we had a seminar on the wastewater reuse policy. The state government has come out with a wastewater reuse policy. And when we were looking at best practices, I believe the Toyota company, they, except for drinking water and for cooking, they don't draw any water from Kaveri or from BWSSB. They're treating all their water. They're using all the wastewater that is generated on their premises. So I think these best practices, these successes, these are going to increase. But at the same time, for an additional 9 million people spread over 800 square kilometers, we are going to have to look at centralized solutions also, which is why we have a massive program for providing water supply, piped water supply to all these new areas. The project is under implementation. We have to connect these areas to the underground drainage. Otherwise, the wastewater is going into either it's going into the ground or it's going into our waterways and polluting our waterways. So we have a massive program of expanding our capacity for sewage treatment. So we'll need a two-pronged approach, both the individual self-sufficient success stories and the larger problem solution.
Thank you so much. Sure.
On fecal sludge, I think, you spoke about government policy. I think there was a very interesting study that's coming out of University of California, Berkeley, where they did the study of fecal sludge in Bangalore. And I think one thing that remains an issue is enforcement, because a lot of the fecal sludge operators are still illegally dumping at night. And I think, so while government policy is good, and this is why I think innovation and technology still plays a role, because I think the fecal sludge is solving one part of the problem, which is how do you empty out the soak pits. But we haven't kind of completed the chain yet. And so I think a lot remains to be done in terms of how we scale up on that. And technology, I believe, is going to play a big part, because I've seen people talk about, and they are very early stages of development of these technologies, but of really innovative ways of treating fecal sludge, and I'm hoping that will address it.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, okay. Okay, we're going to take one more question.
Yeah,
Please.
so this is, I just heard that you want to encourage people to walk more and buy car less. I feel India is a developing country and people looking forward to jobs and incomes. And after getting an income, they look forward to also buy a car. And so instead of buying a car, if you ask someone to walk, and if you have a client who is waiting for your meeting, or if you have a project to submit or something, and you can't simply ask people to walk. So I think this is something misplaced. And what is tenable in Copenhagen, probably not tenable in Bangalore. So we have our own set of things. So
Sure.
please, we need to think little, practically probably. All ideas are noble, but not all noble ideas are,
Yeah.
this.
So I think it's a good question, and it's an important debate to have. The aspirations of people to own a car. I'm not telling you not to buy a car, but I'm going to make it difficult for you to drive the car. You can spend 10 hours in a car, or you can spend the remaining. Suppose it takes. It's already difficult. People spend up to 6 hours a day driving their car. In a democratic country like ours, I cannot tell you not to own a car or drive the car.
Yeah.
However, if I can give you an option saying, I will reduce your commute time to 2 hours a day, and you spend the remaining 4 hours that you get with your family, everybody will make the choice. And we are seeing, so in terms of your question, Ken, on data-based, technology-driven policy making, it has to result in lifestyle changes. And when I mean lifestyle changes, I am seeing evidences in Bangalore that people are actually ditching their cars. They're not selling them. You need the car, but they're keeping the car at home and they're taking the metro. What the government needs to do is that last mile connectivity to the metro station. We are the first city to look at improving your pedestrian infrastructure within a 500-meter radius of every metro station, phase 1. I think we have 45 stations, if I'm correct. But if you're looking at improving pedestrian connectivity to the metro station, because if I fear for my life more than anything else, I care for my life. If I cannot get to the metro, I won't take the metro. If I have to dodge cars driving at 45 kilometers, you can't get 45 kilometers speeds in Bangalore anymore. That's another story. We're crawling at 12 kilometers or something like that, right? But even at that speed, if you have to dodge traffic to get to the metro, there is a fundamental problem there. I think there is good intent within government. I'm not supporting the government. We play a role of being critical, but also give them options.
So the idea is to make the non-car options more attractive.
Yeah,
Right.
so you can very well own the car, you can spend 6 hours a day commuting, or you can take the metro, spend half the money, because time is also money at the end of the day, right? You spend half the money, you spend more time with your family, you have better health because you walk more. That's a choice you make. Yeah. The government can give you options. And I think a progressive set of decision makers will also then start charging you for parking, because I think it's taken for granted that parking is free. Yeah. When anything is given for free, you never realize the value of it. Yeah. When you pay for it through your nose, you will realize why you should not own a car, or you should own a car but use it for specific purposes.
So it's all about prices.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm gonna actually wrap this up now because we're out of time, and I think we've. So I just want to thank you all for attending this launch, and thank the panelists as well. This has been fun, and I'm gonna bring Anna back up here, and she's I think has the final remarks. Thank you.